There are some nights that never really end. They just get quieter. I'm sitting here now because one of those nights has followed me for a very long time. It doesn't wake me up anymore. I'm past that. It just waits, like it knows I don't have the strength to keep pushing it away. My name is Samuel. I'm 88 years old. I've outlived most of the people who knew me when this happened. Maybe that's why it feels possible to say it out loud now. Or maybe it's just that time has thinned everything else, and this is what's left. I wasn't always a quiet man. I used to think of myself as careful, responsible, someone who knew when to hold back. That's what I told myself anyway. Careful sounds better than afraid. Responsible sounds better than uncertain. I grew up learning that you don't disturb people late at night. You don't arrive unannounced. You don't bring your confusion to someone else's doorstep. You sort yourself out, and you live with it. That way of thinking stayed with me longer than it should have. The night I'm talking about was cold, but not dramatically so. No storm, no rain, just one of those evenings where the air feels empty, like everyone has already gone inside and closed their curtains. The streetlights were on, the kind that hums softly if you stand underneath them long enough. I remember the sound my shoes made on the pavement, too loud. I slowed my steps because of it, as if the ground itself might tell on me. I stopped in front of the house and stood there longer than anyone should stand in front of a house that isn't theirs. I could see a light on inside, just one room, warm, ordinary. That light has followed me more faithfully than any person ever has. I raised my hand, lowered it, put it in my coat pocket, took it out again. I told myself I didn't want to intrude. I told myself it was late. I told myself tomorrow would make more sense. Tomorrow was always very understanding that way, always willing to take things off my hands. There was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. That mattered to me more than I admitted at the time. I stood there trying to interpret what that meant, as if I were entitled to answers without asking questions. I could have knocked. I want to be clear about that. Nothing was stopping me except the story I was telling myself about who I was allowed to be. I remember looking at the door handle. The paint was chipped near the edge. I wondered how many times her hand had rested there. It was a strange thing to think about, but my mind was already drifting towards goodbye before anything had even been said. I stepped back, just one step at first, then another. The light stayed on. I told myself she was probably busy, that she'd understand, that I'd explain it properly another time, when the timing was better, and I wasn't standing in the cold with my heart doing things it hadn't done in years. I walked away slowly, like the house might call after me if I didn't rush it. It didn't. The strange thing is, life didn't collapse after that. It rarely does, not all at once. I went on with my days. I slept. I ate breakfast. I showed up where I was expected. That's part of what makes these moments so dangerous. They don't announce themselves as permanent. Weeks passed, then months. The light in that house went on and off like any other light. Eventually, it stopped being something I looked for. I heard later, through other people, the way you hear about things when you've made yourself unavailable to hear them directly. There were changes, decisions, a move that felt sudden only because I hadn't been present for the parts that led up to it. I told myself it wasn't my place anymore, that I'd missed the window, and that windows, once closed, are meant to stay that way. It felt mature to think that. Clean, final. But time doesn't treat unfinished things with respect. It keeps them. It carries them forward and sets them down beside you when you're tired. I married. I worked. I became someone other people relied on. I learned how to sound certain even when I wasn't. From the outside, my life looked settled. From the inside, there was always that small space where something hadn't landed properly. It showed up in odd moments, when I heard a knock on my own door late at night, when I stood in a hallway unsure whether to interrupt, when I waited for someone else to speak first, even when my mouth already knew the words. I didn't connect it right away. I just thought this was what getting older felt like, a narrowing, a quiet acceptance of things unsaid. Years later, I ran into her by accident, not dramatically, in a place neither of us belonged to for very long. We spoke politely, carefully. There was no anger in her voice. That might have been the hardest part. She mentioned that night, not directly, just enough that I knew she had noticed my absence as clearly as I remembered my presence outside her door. She said she waited for a while. Not angrily, just factually, like someone stating the weather from a long time ago. I nodded because nodding was easier than explaining what fear looks like when it's dressed up as courtesy. We didn't speak much after that. There wasn't a reason to. The moment had passed so thoroughly that even touching it felt unnecessary, heavy. Now at 88, there isn't much urgency left in my body, but there is clarity. It comes late, like many things. Not as a lesson, just as an understanding that settles in when there's nothing left to protect. That night wasn't about love exactly, or pride, or even fear in the dramatic sense. It was about choosing to stay intact over choosing to be known, about believing silence was safer than interruption. The cost of that choice wasn't loud. It didn't punish me. It just followed me, quietly, patiently. Sometimes I imagine the sound my knuckles would have made against that door. I imagine the pause on the other side, the ordinary moment where things could have shifted, even slightly. I don't imagine the outcome, just the sound. That's usually where I stop. If you're still here, you don't need to say anything. You can just sit with it for a moment, or leave it where it is. Either way is fine. Some things don't ask to be fixed. They just ask to be heard once, before it gets too quiet.